You're listening to School Solutions Talk, an exploration into the development of school culture and community through the integration of solution-focused practice. Here are your hosts, Tara Gretton and Vicky Essebag. Thanks to our sponsor, Work Collaborative, a not-for-profit movement that helps schools lead change from within. They trust that teachers, leaders, parents, and students have the capability to solve their own challenges when given the right support. Join this global movement of educators at workcollaborative.com.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for listening today. Welcome to School Solutions Talk. I'm Vicky Essebag. Tara Gretton is here. Hi, Tara.
Hi, Vicky.
And we've got Jason Pascoe. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
Hi, Jason.
And we're so fortunate to be interviewing Jason today. We've been waiting for this lovely opportunity, and I just want to say a few words about Jason. He is a leadership consultant, coach, and former teacher and school leader with over 20 years experience across education and organizational development. Beginning his career in schools, he understands firsthand the complexity, pressure, and relational demands of working with people every day. He's the founder of the Enactive solution and vice president of the Australasian Solution-Focused Association. Jason specializes in translating solution-focused practice and related research into practical conversations that help people move forward, strengthen relationships, and reduce burnout. His work spans education systems across Australia and internationally, where he has supported thousands of educators and leaders. Jason also co-hosts the Towards Solutions podcast, where he engages global solution-focused practitioners to share their work and promote solution-focused practice. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Wow, when you hear it read out like that.
Sounds amazing.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to this conversation with you, Jason. And really enjoyed a little bit of conversation that we've already had before we started the podcast. So I think I was saying to you that I was listening to your wonderful podcast, Towards Solutions, that you have with Dion Singh. And we love the way that you open up your podcast. So we thought maybe we'd steal your opening question and ask you, what do you love about the solution-focused approach?
Great question. I'm not sure I've answered that before. I've asked it lots of times. What do I love? I think what I really fell in love with was the simplicity. And that doesn't mean it's easy, but the simplicity and the way it opens up a space for me to be impressed with the person that I'm listening to. And it saved me 25% of my conversation time as a coach when I first discovered it. So an hour session would finish in 45 minutes, and it was easier just to wrap it up because people were happy. But it was efficient. It was really efficient. As soon as people could describe what they wanted.
Yeah, I love that. Impressed with the people that you're having the conversations with. I really love that, and the simplicity. And could you just share a little bit with our listeners about, because like I said, it's not easy. But it's the simplicity. How would you describe the simplicity of the solution-focused approach?
Oh, long pause. Let me think. I suppose now I would say it all happens in the listening. And one of the things I emphasize the most now when I work with leaders is, what are you listening for? So when you understand that you're listening for strengths and resources and skills and strategies that people are using in context, and often a context that you might not be in, and you can feed those things back into a conversation, people get traction on what they want very, very quickly. But being disciplined enough to listen explicitly for those things and then use them in the conversation isn't easy. Because sometimes, especially as educators, we can be well-intentioned fixers. We live in relational environments where there's something going on all the time, and it seems like it's easier just to give people an answer. Go away and do this, try that, then hold a space for them to navigate that relational complexity.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I guess as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, wow, I'm really fascinated by Jason's background in education as an educator and an administrator. And what was it for you? What was it like for you then having those conversations with folks in the schools?
Well, I discovered solution focus after I'd finished my education career. I actually am a third generation teacher. Mum and dad are both high school teachers. Mum's mum was a primary school teacher. And to be honest, I vowed never to be one because I was that kid they came home to at the end of the day. I had great parents, don't get me wrong. But so my undergrad qualifications are in exercise physiology and biomechanics. Then I went on to study epidemiology. No one knew what it was back then. They thought it was something to do with the skin. We all know what it is now. And population medicine. And then I met my lovely wife and thought I'd better get a real job. So I wrote to the Department of Education and they said, be a PE teacher. So I progressed to being head of faculty, and I got to that point in my career where I could progress into senior leadership. And a lot of the senior leaders that I worked with didn't seem terribly happy. And my sister, who's a child and adolescent psychologist, said, I've found your dream job. I thought, well, that sounds good to me. So I left education at that point and I went to manage a project called School Link. So I worked on a child and adolescent mental health team and I worked with 53 secondary schools, over 120,000 square kilometres, me, a laptop and a car. And I was responsible for mental health promotion, prevention, early intervention and pathways to care, which also meant I had no line management leverage in conversations anymore. And I was working on the edge of education, so some conversations went better than others. And I had no idea why until I found the solution-focused approach and went, oh, that's why those conversations went well, and that's why others didn't go so well. And that's when I could be more intentional about what I was doing in conversations and get better at it. So I think the big key was I lost line management leverage. It wasn't an option in a conversation anymore. And that's the challenge I see, and I work with a lot of leaders. They're used to having a lot of them in the conversation and not a lot of the other person. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Sometimes you need to be quite directive and say, go and do this and this, come back and let me know how it's gone. But if you stay there, if you live in that more of you, then you are breeding learned helplessness in your team, because they will learn to come back to you and say, what do you want me to do next? And what do you want me to do next? And that's a rod for your back. Whereas you might be quite directive in some conversations, but then you've got to open up a space where people can reflect and think through what it is that they wanted to achieve and what's working and what might be next for them. So you move up and down this more of you, less of you space in a conversation.
Hmm. I love that the way that you frame that, that it's either more of us in the conversation or less of us in the conversation, and that in the solution focused conversation, there is, in fact, less of us in the conversation. And I can really see the value of that in schools. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that in schools and school systems and how you support them in bringing less of themselves to the conversation?
Yeah, look, back in, I think it was about 2013, 2014, I was working with quite a large school. We ended up training over 200 staff in a coaching style of conversation. And I'd been working with the senior leadership team. They had, we were about 6 weeks post a 2-day training, and I was back there to do a follow-up. And I said, "Oh, what's better?" And they said, "Nothing. We haven't had any time to do any of this stuff. It was great training, but we're just too busy." So we started to look at, where have you been spending your time in conversations? Has it been those more directive, more review conversations, or what are the moments that you've held space for someone else? And we went back through some of the pieces of the training, and they started to place moments on this continuum. And in that moment, I thought, conversations happen all over the place in schools. And sometimes we think too much about the formal ones and not enough about the informal ones, the corridor, the car park, the playground. So I drew a vertical line on the horizontal line, and the top of the vertical line was formal and the bottom was informal. And they went back and they got their Post-it notes for these little moments, those sparkling moments that they'd had, and they started to place them into different quadrants. And that became an article that a guy called John Campbell and I wrote for Rachel Lofthouse in the UK, and we called it the Leadership Conversations Map. And fast forwarding to now, I was at the Australian Council of Educational Leaders New South Wales coaching conference a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about conversations are the work of leadership. That is your tool. That is your greatest tool. So what are the hot topics in your school? And where formally you're leading the conversation, the more of you formal stuff, or the less of you formal stuff, where there are spaces for others to step forward and have a voice and maybe lead? Or what about the informal pieces where you see someone maybe and you say, "Oh, can I ask you a question about such and such?" So you're still leading the conversation. There's still you in there, and you're introducing the topic. Or what are the conversations where people come to you, and they say, "Have you got a minute?" Or, "I've been thinking about." So I realized back then that there are these 4 kind of spaces that all of these conversations in schools happen. And some of those conversations as leaders, we're not invited to. And that's where I started to dive into some of Sean O'Connor's research from the University of Sydney. He did his PhD around the ripple effect of coaching conversations and how they ripple out from one. So he put social networking algorithms on coaching conversations as nodes in an organisation. And then he kind of measured the ripple of that. And there was a positive well-being ripple that came from good quality coaching conversations with leaders. So the leaders were being coached. And I started to think about, what are the conversations in this kind of leadership conversation map that happens in schools, these spaces that we're in all the time. How do they ripple into the conversations that we're not invited to?
Mm.
So that's how that's how it kind of started, and now I'm more and more talking to people about, what is it that you're listening for?
Yeah.
Where are the conversations happening? What are the hot topics in your context, good or bad, you know, and what are you hoping for in terms of each of those topics? And you can actually map where people are having these conversations, where the opportunities are. It makes me think of Professor Jane Dutton's research around high quality connections in workplaces. And she does talk about a smile in a corridor. It doesn't even have to be a conversation. That can make someone's day. You know, making sure you make them a cup of coffee when you boil the jug because they're standing there waiting to make it. Something as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah, Vicky, this is something we talk about a lot and something that I am particularly obsessed with, actually. And in particular in one school that I work in here in the UK, Beach and Cliff, it's something that we have noticed so much of what you're speaking about when we first introduced solution focused into the school. And it was, training the school staff, and it was conversations with leaders, and it was all good. And then it started to kind of ripple out. And actually what we noticed, what was actually so powerful, so much more meaningful, was the everyday interactions. And that we could utilize solution-focused assumptions and ways of being and ways of interacting, and that intentionality around how we can use it, that what was in the corridor in those tiny, tiny moments. And really breaking down some barriers between the leaders, because schools are fascinating like that, isn't it? That sort of, that closed door almost. This is a leadership conversation and you're not part of that. And that can build some divide between staff and leaders. So I love what you're saying about, how do we, I'm really curious to know more about that, sort of bringing the conversations that are happening, the good ones and the bad ones, in the corridors, in the staff room and amongst the teams, into the leadership, and how that kind of goes across. And I think you kind of referred to sort of thinking about well-being, and I'm wondering what a difference it makes to the well-being of school communities when we're having more of these kind of open conversations, and where we're focusing more on the everyday and the importance of everybody being part of some of the bigger conversations too.
What a great question. Well, there's one thing, Tara, I'd like to pick up on, because you said, yes, as leaders, sometimes we can have these conversations behind closed doors, but we've got to realise that there are conversations we're not invited to as leaders as well. Mm. You know, the meeting after the meeting where the real meeting happens?
Yeah.
And that's where the idea of the conversational ripples start to happen. That there are people who will go with a conversation, right, that you start as a leader. And what I mean by that is there will be people who are your allies as you introduce new things. And this is one of the things that I learned in the work that I was doing with Mark McCurgo around host leadership, is in a more coach-like conversation, you're listening for what's wanted. But in a leadership conversation, thinking about yourself as a host of multiple conversations, you're not just listening for what's wanted, you're listening for what's being called for. Because you're listening to multiple conversations. And as you interact with those conversations, there are people who will go with you, some quicker than others. And they're the ones in the meeting after the meeting that start to champion the narrative and the conversation and the change that's being called. And without knowing, this is this ripple effect idea that I got from Sean O'Connor, is that if you're if you can understand what's being called for and you know what that preferred future looks like, and you're engaging multiple relational perspectives in that. So it's not just what I think should be happening and what difference I think that will make. It's what is it that we think should be happening. It's one of the reasons I really love, and this I'll get to the well-being bit, I promise. But it's one of the reasons that I love working with leadership teams, because there's this idea of a collective best hope. And in that one-to-one conversation, we'll often talk about what are your best hopes from our conversation, or how we know this has been useful and things. But when you're asking, and this is often the way I'll do it, everyone will end up with I'm a consultant, so I give everyone a Post-it note. If you don't give everyone a Post-it note, you're not a proper consultant, right? So and they get to think about what are our best hopes for this school in the next whatever the time frame is. One school I worked with a few years ago looked at 3 years out. What are our best hopes for this school over the next 3 years? And then on the back of the Post-it note, they had to write individually what difference that would make for students, what difference it would make for parents, what difference it would make for them in their role. And then they got together with a partner and they had to share their best hopes and the differences that it would make. And then they had to, then they got a little card and they had to they had to listen for the common ground and then write a best hope with their partner that captured both. And then the groups of 2 got together. And so groups of 4 now writing a best hope. And then groups of 4 became groups of 8. And then all of a sudden you've got 2 groups in the room and they've got these big flip charts with their best hopes on, and they can each articulate what difference it would make for their colleagues as individuals and what difference it would make for students and parents. Now, without students and parents in the room, we've still got students and parents in the room. Because people are at least imagining what those best hopes would be like for them. And then once they've come up with, and this is not set in concrete, it can change over the workshop time, it can change over the days and the weeks, but there becomes this collective best hopes statement. Now, if you can do that with a team, we're starting to think from the individual level to the collective level. And then this is always fun, because you do this before you look at your data. A lot of schools will say, "Come, we've just done our student surveys and our parent surveys," and but if you can look at your data through the lens of your collective best hopes, then you're on a treasure hunt, and you can then talk about what's working and how do we do that, and you can also talk about what's not working, and then you ask the solution-focused question. So, out of what's not working, what would you like to be happening instead? And there are themes that start to fit, and some of it will be practice things, some of it will be process things, some of it will be partnership things. And if you can listen for those themes across those lists, you get a really clear idea of where we might need to start working next.
You're giving me lots of ideas.
I'm thinking about.
Hey, this is the inset day activity that I should be doing with that.
Well, you know what? I'm really, really curious about the collective best hopes.
Yeah.
The collective best hopes and how you've broken it down, or how you've built it up, essentially. To say, okay, these are the best hopes. These are my best hopes. But then what are our best hopes? And then the larger group, and then the larger group, until we get to that place where we're really talking about the group's best hopes. And I love that, Jason, because in schools, we don't usually talk about the group's best hopes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think what's really important is asking about the differences. So what difference would that make for you in your role? What difference would that make for our students? What difference would that make? Because then you can head into what would we be noticing? What would they be noticing about us? And that's the detail, because as soon as you start to build a collective best hope, people start to abstract the conversation. So to use Mark McCurgo and Paul Jackson's words, they start to use $5,000 terms, not $5 terms. But if you're asking the other questions and those relational, interactional ones, you've got all these $5 notes, if you like, hanging around the room, and there's a big collective best hope. But you can describe what would be different, what would be the signs of progress, what's happening now.
Yeah. And that makes it tangible, doesn't it? Within that, I'm really kind of visual, and I'm kind of seeing all these post-its, all these. So you've got this massive thing, and within that, you've got these tiny things that everybody can. It's really accessible, isn't it? It's really doable.
Yeah.
People can kind of step back into school life and instantly be able to put that into practice, whatever that might be. Because that's so often, it's like, I've just got caught up in the school of back into term, and I just forgot about all of that. And actually that difference and the detail of what that would look like, that tiny, tiny, small step, it feels really doable. Yeah. Wow. Yes, I literally have just designed my activity.
For me, that's the fun stuff. And I think it's that epidemiology, population medicine background where I got to step back and look at the big picture stuff. What are the patterns here? What are we noticing? But to make it concrete and actionable and doable was very, very important in those. Well, it is very important when you're working on strategy, because how many times have people written a school plan and they know there's here we call it external validation. The panel comes in and you've got to have a whole range of stuff, and you get rated at different, different levels. And I did this with one school only a year ago. They were just heading into their external validation. I worked with them for 6 months, and we got them to think about, because we'd also used some of the concept of host leadership. So we got them to think about, they were hosting the panel, and what were they actually inviting the panel to? Let's suppose it was a dinner, and what would be on the menu? So based on the key things they had to present, they came up with a 3 or 4 course menu, and they had all of the ingredients, their data there. And we spent 4 hours, half a day. And I was coming back a couple of weeks later for another half a day. And after 4 hours, they said, you know what, we've got it, we've nailed it. So that everything was so actionable and concrete that they put their external validation process together in 4 hours, and in 2 weeks had delivered on it, ready to go.
Yeah. It's that actionable stance, right? We're not going to sit in discussing the issues, or we're not going to be thinking about all of that. We're just moving into that actionable stance. And it's very empowering from the get-go, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to say, let's really think about how we want to do this, and what comes out of that.
Sorry.
Tara, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. And it brings me back to that question around well-being, because you described solution focused as conversation as protection against burnout, and I think through our work in schools, that's so often, well-being feels sometimes that it's something that feels neglected, or it's kind of, or it's discussed, but it's not, there aren't any actions. And so I'm, curious to what difference does this make to, we've seen the difference that it can make, to staff well-being, and as you say, can protect people against burnout. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I suppose, again, my interest there came out of my background. Once I'd finished working on that project I mentioned before across 53 schools, I was actually asked to work on a national project that was part of our youth suicide prevention initiative in Australia. It was called Mind Matters, and it was in secondary schools. So I found myself coordinating a state component of that. So I went from 53 schools to 907. And part of my role was to help schools set up data-informed mental health and wellbeing plans through a mental health promotion lens rather than an illness lens. And it got to 2011, and I was running that project, and I'd had a huge amount of fun. I'd worked with some amazing schools, and that's when I met Mark McCurgo and Jenny Clark in Sydney, and we went out for dinner after a workshop, and I started to put solution focus into the practice of those workshops. And what I found was that, yes, at an individual level, this is amazing. And you can look at Dr. Adam Frower's research with Bolivian child protection workers. You can look at the research that happened in the Tenerife, that people who know how to have a solution-focused conversation end up better off than people who don't. So what got me thinking about the ability for leaders to have a solution-focused conversation was only a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. There was some research done in Australia by Dr. Adam Fraser, and it was looking at secondary traumatic stress in educators. And he found, it's one of the largest studies that's been done, he found that educators have higher levels of vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress than paramedics and psychologists. So I had a couple of conversations with Adam about his research, and it's kind of like teachers are in this highly relational space where they're picking up the little bits of everything from colleagues, from families, from kids. And if we're that well-intentioned fixer, because we love people and we love what we do and we want to help, we take on more and more and more, and it takes its toll. But Adam Frower's research was very interesting because he used a vicarious resilience measure. And he was able to show that after 3 days of training in having solution-focused conversations, child protection workers in Bolivia actually got a bounce in their own resilience.
Wow.
From listening to their clients really well, asking them solution-focused questions, and being impressed with the way they were navigating their complexity. So I think it's really important that these things work on this level, and the ripples that they have, if we notice the patterns, some of the schools that I've seen that have done this really well, they align their practice. Often we'll go in and we'll talk about, this is the practice we need to see from teachers, and this is the things we need to see kids doing, and it's all in the doing. But you'll hit policies, procedures, and processes that block the practice at some level. And we learnt this on the National Mind Matters project because a lovely, lovely man called Trevor Hazel, who ran the Hunter Institute of Mental Health here, won the contract to do the national evaluation. And one of the things that they did in the evaluation is they looked through the lens of the Health Promoting Schools framework, which was around curriculum, teaching and learning, organisation, ethos and environment, and partnerships. And we realised a few things, that yes, it was about curriculum, teaching and learning, but it was bigger. It was about professional practice. It was about how we showed up in the classroom, out of the classroom, with parents, all of that sort of stuff. But if there were things in the policy process, ethos, and even the physical environment of the school, and in those days, for example, the school counsellor might have been, in the only office over in that section of the yard, and if a kid was seen walking in that direction, they were stigmatised straight away, yeah? So the physical environment plays a role. And then the recognition of partnerships, that schools were never, ever set up to do it all, even though we're being asked to do more and more. So what were the partnerships that would support the professional practice that we wanted to see? But there was a nuance to that. It was, what were the internal partnerships and what were the external partnerships that were needed? And Trevor, in his evaluation, came up with, I don't think this is the best terms, but a type A, a type B, and a type C school, right? And it was really just around those three areas. Where might the school need to start? And sometimes it's not with more professional learning. Sometimes it's sitting down and looking at the structures and the processes that are in place and how that's playing out in the classroom or the staff room, or hold off on the professional learning until we start to restructure that. Other schools, it was, yes, do the professional learning, and they would, the practice would bounce off those things, and they'd then go, okay, now we're going to have to work on the policies and making sure this is sustainable. And if the leadership team leaves, it's still there in the structures and the processes of what's happening, and we can explain why that's happening. So there's the individual wellbeing ripple that we get from having these conversations, and there's the organisational strategies that we can put in place to grow them, sustain them, and pass them on.
Thanks to Family Based Solutions, a charitable organization that aims to end the cycle of abuse in families and to repair relationships using the solution-focused brief therapy method. They offer counseling services, support groups, solution-focused training, online support, and global leadership to those who need it most. Learn more at familybasedsolutions.org. Thanks to our sponsor, the Canadian Centre for Brief Coaching, the CCBC provides workplace training programs, coaching, and consulting to organizations across various sectors worldwide, all with solution-focused coaching as the fundamental educational framework. For more, visit pracademia.com. That's pracademia.com.
Really interesting what you said about the kind of physical. And again, that's something that we've noticed at Beechin was, and this is something that's kind of evolved over the years of solution focus being there, but it is actually kind of myself and the other solution focus practitioners that making us really visible and being it becoming the norm that that students kind of walk towards that room, to the point that it's like, oh, can I bring my mate? I think he'd benefit from a solution-focused conversation, and that's because it's kind of rippled out across, and that partnership. Because I'm external. I mean, I don't work, but I'm very much part of the school community. So it's a partnership. And I think actually it's really, so interesting listening to what you're saying, because I feel like actually it's those small sort of tweaks around the physical and the partnerships that's actually probably made even more difference than the professional development, the training, I mean, they come together, but it's, and another question is, where's a place to start for school leaders? There's so much in what you've shared, and obviously for Vicky and I, this is just like, makes I'm speaking for you here, Vicky, but it's definitely making my heart sing, and really inspiring in the things that you're sharing with us. But what would, for our school leaders or anybody from educational kind of communities, where is a good place to start, Jason?
And if I can just add, Tara, you spoke, Jason, so beautifully about resilience. How do we tap into that resilience?
Okay, well, let's start with the first part of the question. You start where you're at. You start where you're at, and you start listening where you're at. So one of the activities I'll often suggest for leaders is to take Hey Sun Moon's dialogic orientation quadrants, yeah? And sit in some meetings. Just sit in some meetings and map where the conversation's happening. Is this a preferred future piece? Is this a resourceful past piece? Is this a troubled past or problem past conversation? Or is this a dreaded future conversation? And they will bounce around, but you'll notice where people are getting stuck and which agenda items they're getting stuck on. And they become the hot topics. And you've got choices then. You can work with what's working and the topics that are flowing, or you can start to ask, so what would we like to be happening instead? And just watch. Once I call the dialogic orientation quadrants the listening compass, because I imagine that big map that I explained to you before is kind of the map, and you need a compass to navigate what's there. And actually, we just there'll be another one of our podcasts go up shortly with a lovely guy who uses solution focus in adventure therapy, and he talks about low visibility environments and getting a triangulation, and your compass is absolutely key and your map's really key on that. So thinking about or listening really closely to where conversations are headed, whether it's with individuals or with groups, and that's part of listening for what's not just what's wanted, but what's being called for.
Yeah.
And when you've done that, then you might get an idea of what the next step might be. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to change too much too soon. Now, what was the resilience piece, Vicky?
How do we tap into the resilience? So, here we have staff members who, many of whom at one time or another are experiencing burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we know that they have resilience. We know that there is a lot that is working for them and that they're accessing this resilience on a daily basis. Otherwise, they would not be able to manage.
Mhm.
So they're managing.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we tap into that? How do we celebrate that with them?
I think that's a really good question. For me, it was helping to see schools as people talk about complex adaptive systems. I don't. I talk about complex relational systems. There's just relationships within relationships within relationships. And I love what you said there about they are managing. It's just that sometimes they can't see themselves managing. And this is where a solution-focused conversation is so important, because the future hasn't happened yet. And even just asking someone, so what would you like to be happening instead?
Mm.
To answer that question, they have to draw on their resourceful past. Because the future hasn't happened yet, you don't have the language for what's out in the future yet. You've got to use the language that you have, and they start to talk about things that they'd like to see in the future, which must exist somewhere. And I think this is the magic of a solution-focused conversation. It's that I'll often get people to look around the room and I'll give them 15 seconds, and I'll give them a countdown. You've got to spot as many red things as possible. And we'll get down to 10, and then I'll go 5, 4, 3. And I'll say, okay, have you got a number in mind? And they're all ready to tell you how many red things they saw. And then you say, how many green things did you see? Don't look now. And that is your reticular activating system. That is what a solution-focused conversation does so well. If you can describe a preferred future from multiple relational perspectives in detail, you have to draw on your resourceful past or what's working even just a little bit, those exceptions to the problem, to describe that situation, which means you get to walk out of that conversation noticing more of the preferred future already happening. It's like I'll say in training, I've got 4 kids, and whenever my wife Victoria told me she was pregnant, what did I see? Strollers, baby on board signs, pregnant women. They were always in my world, but now they were front and center of my world. And if we can help people articulate a preferred future, and it doesn't have to be a distant one, 3 years, what would you like to be telling me next week when we get together? And what difference would it make if you were telling me those sorts of things? Yeah. I'm just trying to think. I think it was Aisha from Family-Based Solutions that wrote an article on miracle moments. Yeah. Just those micro moments, and helping people think about or see themselves in their story differently. Anton Stellerman said, I've done so many podcasts now that I've got all these people in mind. So if I'm not dropping names for the sake of dropping names. It's people like Anton said at the end of the podcast we did with him. He said, it's an absolute privilege to be in a room and people who have worked with each other for 25 years come in and you're asking them different questions, solution-focused ones, and they meet each other anew. They meet a version of each other that they've never met before in 25 years of working with each other. These are the things, these are the bits that stick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that, Jason. Changing the narrative in the moment. That's effectively what's happening there.
Yeah. That's a great way to describe it. Thank you. That was a lot shorter than what I said, Vicky. Thanks.
Oh.
Wow.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for such a wonderful, inspiring and thought-provoking conversation. Can't get my words out. Conversation, Jake. There's so much. Really, really, really looking forward to sharing this. I think there's just so much that people can take from it, and I know we definitely have. And is there anything else that you would want to say or share as your final comments before we bring our conversation to a close?
Thank you very, very much for the invitation. It's been an absolute joy, and my encouragement for people would be listen for what's working and start there.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for a brilliant conversation today, a wonderful time, and your generosity to join us and to share your experience with us and your expertise. And we would like to post any links or resources that you might have that we could post on the podcast episode. Is there anything in particular that you would like to highlight right now?
Maybe we can put, and I'm assuming Jason will say yes to this, maybe we can put just a little PDF that I use of the dialogic orientation quadrants, the compass, so that people would download it and go and sit in a meeting and actually listen to where the conversation's happening.
That's great. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And we will certainly, we could have a link to your business, the Enactive solution, and we can also include a link to the Towards Solutions podcast, your podcast.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Maybe your cafe as well.
Yes.
If anyone finds themselves in New Lambton, Australia, come to Little Gozo.
Oh, great.
Thanks, Jason.
Yes.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
And thank you to our listeners as well. Take care.
Our sponsor, the Instructional Coaching Group, is the global destination for coaching and education, grounded in more than 25 years of research focused on improving teaching, strengthening leadership, and increasing student success. The Instructional Coaching Group partners with schools and systems worldwide to build sustainable coaching practices that support educators and improve outcomes for students. Learn more at instructionalcoaching.com. School Solutions Talk is produced by Tara Gretton and Vicky Essebag. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe so that our podcast can reach even more listeners like you. Thanks for downloading.